Has this ever happened to you? A game drops, everyone's obsessed, it's all anyone's talking about, and then a few months later, all people do is trash it, like it's the worst thing ever made. But why? What makes a game go from masterpiece status to getting buried in the hate pit? Today I'm going to show you some games that were loved at launch, but over time became targets of heavy criticism, and maybe you'll even agree with some of it. Welcome to Games Insights. I'm Arthur. Hype can be a tricky thing. Sometimes the excitement is so high that we see a game as perfect, but then, after the dust settles, we start noticing the flaws. And the internet, being the internet, turns it into a flood of complaints. Let's talk about some cases where this happened, starting with one of the most anticipated releases in recent years. But before we dive in, smash that like button to support the vid. It's super quick and helps us a ton. And of course, hit that subscribe button. Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy was one of those releases that felt like a dream come true for Harry Potter fans. An open-world RPG set in the Wizarding World where you created your own character, explored Hogwarts, and were part of your own story. It was basically everything the community wanted. At launch, the game was an insane success. Everyone was playing, posting clips, uncovering secrets, and soaking in every detail of the castle. Even without the classic characters from the saga, the game managed to deliver a nostalgic and immersive experience. The graphics were stunning, the soundtrack captured the magic of the franchise, and flying around on a broom or strolling through Hogsmeade was just amazing. But then came the twist. Over time, people started realizing the game wasn't that deep. The open world, which seemed massive at first, started showing signs of emptiness. The side activities felt repetitive and often pointless, like they were just there to stretch out playtime. And the big problem, the choices and morality system, which was supposed to have a big impact, ended up being pretty shallow. Whether you used dark spells or tried to be a model student, the story didn't change much. In the end, it felt like your decisions didn't matter as much as the game made them out to be. Another thing that started annoying players was the lack of gameplay evolution. Combat was fun at first, but after a few hours, it became repetitive. Plus, boss battles weren't as epic as expected, with some enemies feeling like recycled versions of previous challenges, but the final blow came when the devs announced that Quidditch, one of the most iconic sports in the Harry Potter universe, would be added later as a free DLC. This was the chance to bring the game back to life and give it a fresh vibe, especially since Warner Bros. Wasn't exactly riding high at the time, but then came the bombshell. Quidditch would be released as a separate paid game. That didn't sit well at all because the community had been asking for Quidditch from the start, and it felt like a purely commercial move. The result? The game, which was a strong contender for GOTY 2023, just vanished from the conversation and wasn't even nominated. Resident Evil 4 Remake took its place. The hype evaporated, and from being an absolute success, Hogwarts Legacy became one of those games where, if someone mentions it, the usual response is just, "Oh, I don't even remember that game anymore." So what do you think? Do you agree with the criticism? Or do you think people were way too harsh? Astrobot. This one's a classic case where the internet decides to hate a game, not because of what it is, but because of what it represents. Astrobot was a game that was super well received, especially by the Sony community. It managed to bring back nostalgia for the PlayStation's history, delivering a fun adventure filled with references to iconic PlayStation franchises and with light, addictive gameplay. From the first trailers, fans were hyped. After all, Astrobot had always been treated as PlayStation's secondary mascot, popping up more in tech demos than in its own game, but now it was finally getting its chance to shine. And when it launched, the reception was excellent. Critics praised the creativity of the levels, the nods to Sony classics, and how the game was accessible for new players but also captivating for veterans. But then came the 2024 Game of the Year. Astrobot won, and what was once love turned into hate. The problem wasn't the game itself, but the fact that it beat out Elden Ring DLC Shadow of the Erdtree and Black Myth: Wukong, two titles with extremely passionate fan bases who were hoping to see their games win the trophy. As soon as the announcement was made, social media was flooded with criticism, memes, and people saying Astrobot didn't deserve to win. Suddenly, the game that was seen as one of the best platformers in recent years was being trashed as a childish and boring game. A lot of people claimed it only won because Sony has influence over the awards, and that it was ridiculous for a platformer to beat out such heavy, complex titles. But wait, hasn't the game stayed the same? It was good before. So why is it suddenly bad just because it won an award? This kind of reaction has happened before. Games go from fun and praised to overrated and hated. As soon as they get recognition, Astro Bot didn't change at all after winning. It's still the same innovative and fun game. The only thing that changed was the way some of the community started viewing it. Marvel's Spider-Man 2. When Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was announced, expectations were through the roof. The first game, released in 2018, was one of the best superhero games ever made, with fluid gameplay, an engaging story, and a vibrant open world. Then came Spider-Man Miles Morales, a sort of spin-off that, while shorter, kept the high quality. So when the sequel was confirmed, people expected something even bigger and better. More characters, more abilities, more villains, and most importantly, more surprises. At first, it seemed like the game was going to deliver all of that. The arrival of the symbiote in Venom as one of the antagonists promised to change the gameplay. The combat was even more dynamic, and switching between Peter and Miles added a fresh layer to the experience. But over time, the excitement started to fade and reality set in. Spider-Man 2 was a lot like its predecessor. Not that it's necessarily a problem. The first game's foundation was already solid, but what bothered a lot of people was the fact that, despite being sold as an evolution, it didn't bring enough significant changes. New York City was pretty much the same. The side missions didn't innovate much, and many felt like they were playing a souped-up version of the first game, not something truly new, and then came the full price. If the game had been sold as an expansion, the reception might have been better, but paying full price for something that felt like a big DLC of the first Spider-Man left a bad taste. And this comparison got even stronger as the months went by. After the initial hype wore off, complaints started about the lack of innovation, the repetition of mechanics, and even technical issues. Another point of controversy was the performance. Despite the stunning visuals, Spider-Man 2 demanded a lot from the PS5 hardware, and some players reported frame drops and small bugs that broke the immersion. Also, Insomniac, the game's developer, didn't bring enough endgame content to keep players engaged after the main story, which led many to finish the game and just drop it. In the end, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 isn't a bad game, quite the opposite. It delivers exactly what you'd expect from a Spider-Man game, but maybe that's the issue. It delivers exactly what's expected, without surprises or big revolutions, and in a market where players are always looking for something new and unexpected, that lack of innovation might be enough to turn an excellent game into a disappointment for many. So, did you play Spider-Man 2? Do you think it was just more the same, or were the critiques exaggerated? God of War Ragnarok. If there's one game that arrived with sky-high expectations, it was God of War Ragnarok. After the huge success of the 2018 game, everyone wanted to see how Kratos and Atreus' journey would continue, especially with the promise of an epic battle against Thor, and in fact, the game delivered an electrifying start, with brutal combat and a breathtaking cinematic story. But after the dust settled, the criticism started. The first thing that bothered a lot of fans was teenage Atreus. In the previous game, he was a bit arrogant at times, but now, older, he became even more stubborn and impulsive. Some people just couldn't stand how he kept insisting on making his own decisions, and how Kratos, in many moments, seemed to just accept it without questioning. For people who grew up with Kratos being ruthless and full of rage, seeing him take on a more peaceful, fatherly role was a shock, and not necessarily in a good way. Many criticized the lack of aggression in the character, saying he lost the killer instinct that defined the series in earlier games. Of course, it makes sense within the story. The Kratos of God of War's 2018 wasn't the same as the one from Greek mythology, and he was trying to change, but for some players, this change took away from the essence of the character. The gameplay was refined and more polished compared to the previous game. I personally prefer Ragnarok's gameplay, but it didn't bring that many new features. The weapon arsenal, for example, was still pretty limited. The big new addition was the Draupnir Spear, which did bring a fresh dynamic, but overall, fans felt like something more was missing. Why couldn't we use Thor's hammer, for example? Or have more mythical weapons from the Norse gods? The story also sparked discussions. While many praised the emotional development of the characters, some narrative decisions divided the community. Some character deaths were unexpected, and the ending left several loose ends for a possible sequel. But instead of an epic, definitive conclusion, many felt the game ended in a safe way, without taking as many risks as expected. Also, one of the biggest complaints from players was the excess of dialogue and hints within the gameplay. You barely had time to solve a puzzle before a character just gave you the answer. This made it feel like the game was holding your hand too much, taking away some of the satisfaction of exploring and solving challenges on your own. At the end of the day, God of War Ragnarok is still an excellent game, delivering grand moments and one of the best narratives in recent years. But it also showed that when expectations are too high, even the smallest detail can turn into a source of disappointment. So what do you think? Do you feel like the hate was exaggerated? Or do you think God of War Ragnarok missed the mark in some ways? And now, here comes that moment when I gotta open my heart and ask for your sub to the channel. It might seem silly to you, but that's what keeps this channel running. The engine, the gas. The motor of this channel is your subscription. Just one person makes all the difference for us. We literally throw a party when someone subscribes. It's a project I'm starting on my own. No support, no help from anyone. I'm a small channel just getting started, so I'm asking you to please subscribe to help us improve, to show that you're liking this kind of content, and to motivate us to keep going. Thanks a lot for subscribing. Thanks for letting me count on you. Take care and see you later, alligator.